It's been known for a while now that Disney is slowly but surely borrowing from Star Wars legends as much as possible. There are some original ideas, however, when it comes to even recycled ideas, you can kind of see them from afar. The Crimson Dawn, for example, Kira, this is a George Lucas plan for sure, because his plans for the sequel trilogy were essentially what we are seeing from the TV shows, not so much from the sequel trilogy movies that we saw by Disney and Lucasfilm. And this got me to thinking, what were George Lucas's original plans for Luke Skywalker? It's been, of course, no secret that one of the most bungled ideas in the sequel trilogy was the handling of Luke Skywalker, a famed Jedi Knight that seemed to have fallen by the wayside. He was treated as a hermit, basically, and his only movie who kind of paid him somewhat of an attention was The Last Jedi, and even that movie is mostly controversial due to its handling of Luke Skywalker's story. Naturally, a lot of fans suspect that George Lucas would have handled things differently when it came to Luke Skywalker and a lot of other things too, so I wanted to make this video to kind of come into terms what the George Lucas sequels might have been about. In fact, you might be surprised to learn that a lot of what we're seeing from the TV shows would have been seen in this sequel trilogy, because according to George Lucas, the original plan was for Darth Maul to come back and be the godfather of crime in the universe as the Empire fails, meaning that once Episode 6 wraps up, Palpatine dies, and the Empire is in a downfall, this would have been the time for Darth Maul and his crime syndicates to flourish. Essentially, Maul would have had his own apprentice, Darth Talon, in the years after the original trilogy, at that point having amassed enough power in the underworld to rise as a major threat after the Empire's demise. This means that Darth Maul and Talon would have battled Luke Skywalker and his attempt to restore the Jedi Order. They would have crossed paths in the New Republic, and as well as with Leia, who would have been revealed as the true chosen one in the sequel trilogy, according to George Lucas. With Disney's purchase, of course, all these plans for the sequels went by the wayside, but you can see inspirations of it in the Clone Wars Season 7, for example, in the Bad Batch. The crime syndicates are all over the place, even in the comics and in Solo: A Star Wars Story. It wasn't Darth Talon who was the apprentice of Darth Maul during the Imperial era, but in fact it was Kira who was secretly working for Darth Maul, so she essentially replaced the role of that apprentice. The comics showcase now Crimson Dawn being a fierce opponent of Palpatine's Empire. Then we have the Shadow of the Empire material that would have definitely been shown in George Lucas's sequel plans. I mean, it was all over the place and they had a lot of material to work with. It's kind of a mystery even to this day as to why Disney chose to scrap everything and start afresh, anew. I understand that there were some wonky ideas in there, such as the Yuuzhan Vong, for example, might have been hard to sell. In the comics, it might be a good idea in the novels, but not maybe in live action. That might have scared them. Also, characters like Starkiller were definitely too OP, so I can kind of understand that, but there's a lot of material that now Disney is just starting to dip its toes into with the TV series. All in all, a lot of plans, but what were the original plans for Luke Skywalker? What did George Lucas want to showcase with Luke in the sequel era? We know that in Disney's sequel trilogy, Luke Skywalker never ended up marrying or having a love interest for that matter, but it turns out that George Lucas once hinted that Luke would have a romance plot once he would begin filming the sequel trilogy, his own sequel trilogy. Many fans were disappointed to see that Luke Skywalker bloodline did not continue in the sequels. It was only Han and Leia who had Ben Solo. Up until now, all we have had was the Skywalker saga, so it's understandable that fans were curious to see if Luke had married, had a child, and the Skywalker lineage continues, because it does in Legends, but it doesn't in canon. Star Wars, as you know, has an interesting history when it comes to romance, especially members of the Skywalker family. In fact, the original trilogy, if you guys remember, before it was revealed that Luke and Leia were related, Luke, Leia, and Han had some sort of a love triangle between them. This perhaps worked out for the best because wives of Skywalkers do not have such a great ending as we see with Padme. However, we have an interview by George Lucas in 1988 where he clearly hints that Luke Skywalker would have some kind of a romance in the sequel trilogy written by him. In The Secret History of Star Wars by Michael Kaminsky, there lies an excerpt from the interview The Starlog, issue number 127. In that, George Lucas was asked a lot of potential details of his sequel trilogy. When asked, why didn't you give Luke a girl, Luke responded by saying, you haven't seen the last 3 yet. While his answer was kept intentionally vague, I mean, it does suggest that George at one point did plan to give Luke in the sequel trilogy, in the quote-unquote last 3, some sort of a romance and eventually some sort of a lineage, children. Whether that be a boy or a girl, it would be a Skywalker who would continue the tumultuous history of the Skywalker. But the problem is George Lucas was very fickle when it came to any plans or storylines, because even back in the day, he ended up changing his minds when it comes to Luke Skywalker. Back in the original trilogy, we had no idea of Jedi being forbidden to form any emotional attachments, but when it came to the Star Wars prequels, they showed us a totally different side of the Jedi Order, of how a Jedi should live its life, and it is because of this that George Lucas may have ended up scrapping the entire Luke romance idea out of the question, even if he had made the sequel. This is clearly shown when it comes to Mara Jade. Mara Jade first appeared in 1991 in Heir to the Empire by Timothy Zahn. Mara Jade was formerly the Emperor's Hand, and she resented Luke for Palpatine's death in Return of the Jedi. However, having to team up with Luke at one point, the two put aside their differences, and she eventually became the student of Luke Skywalker. They fell in love, they got married, and had a son named Ben Skywalker. This is where Ben Solo's name kind of originates. It's inspired by Ben Skywalker, Luke's son. But it's important to understand that George Lucas eventually decided against Luke Skywalker getting married after Return of the Jedi. There's even a skit in Robot Chicken where he is angry that one of the employees mentions Mara Jade and that she was married to Luke, so it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but eventually we see that George might have had kind of the same ideas when it came to Luke Skywalker. Maybe not being a lonely hermit, not wanting to talk to anybody, but definitely not married and having children. So what do you guys think? If George Lucas had made the sequels, would he have succumbed to the pressure and give Luke and Mara Jade a chance, or do you not see it happening ever? Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and if you enjoyed, leave a thumbs up down below, subscribe for dailies. Now you have an awesome day, Star Wars fans. I'll see you in the next video, and may the Force be with you. Until then.